What would you do if you saw a life hanging by a thread, a stranger bleeding on the roadside, calling out for help? Would you stop, knowing it could cost you everything? Or would you keep driving, convincing yourself someone else would come along? For Marcus Carter, the choice was clear. He couldn't just drive past. But his decision to save a man's life came with consequences he never expected. Losing his job, jeopardizing his family's fragile finances, and facing a future filled with uncertainty. What Marcus didn't realize was that the stranger he helped wasn't just anyone, and that act of kindness would change both their lives forever. Before we dive into this gripping story of sacrifice, resilience, and unexpected rewards, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you're as inspired by Marcus's journey as we are, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss another incredible story like this. The morning sunlight filtered through the cracked windshield of Marcus's old car as it rattled down the quiet suburban road. Dressed in his slightly faded store uniform with his name stitched neatly onto the chest, Marcus gripped the wheel tightly. His thoughts were already racing about the day ahead. Marcus's car, a patchwork of repairs and prayers, creaked over the uneven asphalt. Every mile it managed to cover felt like a small miracle. But Marcus barely noticed the rattle. It was just another day in his world. With his shift starting in less than half an hour, Marcus knew being late was not an option. Just as he rounded a curve, something unusual caught his eye. A sleek, black luxury car lay half-submerged in a ditch by the side of the road. Its front end was mangled, buried deep in the mud. Marcus instinctively eased off the gas, his heart pounding. At first, he thought it was an abandoned wreck. But then, movement near the driver's side caught his attention. A man, his suit rumpled and smeared with dirt, was sprawled on the ground beside the car. He was clutching his arm, weakly raising it in a desperate call for help. Marcus slammed his brakes and pulled over. His sneakers crunched against the gravel as he hurried toward the scene, calling out, "Hey, are you okay?" The man barely stirred, his voice a faint whisper drowned out by the rustling of the morning breeze. "Help?" "Hospital," the man gasped, his eyes fluttering. Marcus crouched beside him, his breath catching at the sight of blood trickling down the man's temple, and his leg twisted unnaturally. "Stay with me," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the storm of adrenaline surging through him. He took one glance at the car, its front crumpled beyond recognition. It wasn't going anywhere, that much was clear. Marcus knew he didn't have time to wait for an ambulance. "I'll get you to the hospital," he promised, standing up and surveying his options. It wasn't easy. The man was heavier than Marcus had expected, and every groan of pain he let out as Marcus moved him felt like a punch to the gut. "Almost there," Marcus muttered to himself as he maneuvered the man into the passenger seat of his car. By the time he buckled him in, Marcus was drenched in sweat. Sliding into the driver's seat, Marcus started the car, silently praying that it wouldn't give out on him at this critical moment. The engine groaned, but eventually roared to life, a small victory in the chaos. "You're gonna be okay," Marcus said, more to reassure himself than the man beside him. Glancing sideways, he noticed how pale the man was, his breath shallow but steady. As the hospital came into view, relief flooded through Marcus. He skidded to a stop at the ER entrance, throwing the car into the park and jumping out. "I need help," he shouted, waving at the nearest nurse. "He's hurt really bad." Within moments, a team of nurses and an orderly wheeled out a stretcher. Marcus stepped back, watching as they carefully transferred the man out of his car and onto the stretcher. One nurse turned to Marcus, her tone brisk. "What happened?" "I found him on the side of the road," Marcus explained, his voice tight. "His car's wrecked. He needs help." "You did the right thing," the nurse replied with a nod before following the stretcher through the automatic doors. As the doors slid shut, Marcus found himself standing alone under the harsh morning sun. A strange mixture of relief and unease settled over him. He had done what he could, but now reality came crashing back. Checking the time on his phone, Marcus winced. He was over 20 minutes late for his shift. A pit formed in his stomach as he climbed back into his car and gripped the steering wheel. His mind replayed the events of the past hour over and over. "Did I do enough?" He wondered aloud, hearing the faint echo of his late father's voice in his mind. "You always stop to help." no matter the cost. With a deep breath, Marcus started the engine and headed toward work, bracing himself for whatever consequences awaited him. The groan of Marcus's car echoed through the parking lot as he pulled into the space nearest to the employee entrance. He glanced at the dashboard clock, his stomach sinking. 25 minutes late. As Marcus stepped out, the usual bustling sounds of shopping carts and chatter filled the air. But today, everything felt heavier, like the world was pressing down on his shoulders. He jogged toward the employee entrance, mentally rehearsing his explanation. The fluorescent lights inside the store felt harsh as he stepped through the door. Mr. Grayson, the store manager, was waiting by the clock-in terminal. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest, and his sharp blue eyes locked onto Marcus like a spotlight. "You're late," Mr. Grayson snapped, his tone as cold as the freezer aisle. "I know, sir," Marcus said, catching his breath. "But I don't want to hear it," Grayson cut him off, his words biting. "You're always trying to pull something, aren't you? Maybe you think just because you're young, you can show up whenever you feel like it." Marcus's hands clenched at his sides. He forced himself to stay calm. "It's not like that, sir," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I had to stop. There was this guy. His car was in a ditch, and he was hurt. I took him to the hospital." Grayson raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a sneer. "A man in a ditch? Really? What's your excuse?" He chuckled humorlessly, shaking his head. "Creative, Marcus. I'll give you that. But excuses don't keep this store running." Marcus felt heat rising in his chest. "It's not an excuse," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I saved someone's life. He could have died out there." Grayson's expression darkened, his tone dropping lower. "You saved a life? Let me tell you something, boy." The word hit like a slap, but Grayson didn't pause. "The only life you need to worry about is your own. And right now, you're out of a job. You don't show up on time. You don't get to work here. Simple as that." Marcus froze, his breath catching. "You're really firing me? After what I just told you?" "I don't care if you were rescuing the president," Grayson snapped. "Late is late. Pack up your locker and get out." The words stung worse than Marcus had expected. He wanted to shout, to argue, but the weight of defeat settled over him. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the back room. The sound of his sneakers scuffing against the polished floor echoed in the silence as he emptied his locker. A wave of frustration and sadness washed over him. He had done the right thing, hadn't he? So why did it feel like he was being punished for it? The drive home felt longer than usual. Marcus barely noticed the hum of his car's engine or the familiar landmarks passing by. All he could think about was the look on Grayson's face, the way he had dismissed everything so easily. When he pulled into the driveway, the sight of the worn-down house greeted him. The paint was peeling, the roof sagged, and the shutters hung crooked. It was a constant reminder of how much they were struggling. Marcus stepped inside quietly, the creak of the front door echoing through the small, dimly lit house. The familiar scent of old wood and faint mildew hit him, grounding him in reality. "Noah! Marcus is home!" Maya, his little sister, shouted excitedly, running out of their shared bedroom clutching her worn teddy bear. Their younger brother, Noah, followed close behind, his face lighting up. "You're home early," Noah said, looking up at Marcus with wide eyes. "I thought you'd be gone until dinner." Marcus forced a small smile, ruffling his brother's hair. "Yeah, plans changed," he said softly. "Does that mean you'll play with us now?" Maya asked, her voice filled with hope. Marcus hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen. "Soon, Maya. I just need to talk to Mom first, okay?" From the kitchen, his mother's raspy voice called out, "Marcus? What are you doing at home?" Marcus walked in, finding his mom seated at the small, rickety kitchen table. She looked frail, her thin frame draped in an old cardigan. The herbal tea she swore helped with her symptoms sat steaming in front of her. Her tired eyes met his, filled with concern. "What happened? Why aren't you at work?" Marcus gripped the back of a chair, the words catching in his throat. "There was an accident," he began. "On my way to work, I saw a car in a ditch. A man was hurt really badly. He could barely move. I couldn't just leave him there, so I drove him to the hospital." His mother's expression softened, but the worry in her eyes deepened. "And? Is he okay?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "I didn't stay long enough to find out, but I did what I could." So why aren't you at work now? She pressed gently. Marcus looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Grayson fired me. I was late, and he didn't care why. Her sharp intake of breath filled the small kitchen. He fired you? She said, disbelief heavy in her voice. After you saved someone's life? Marcus nodded, bitterness creeping into his tone. He said, excuses don't pay bills. His mother leaned back in her chair, her hand clutching her chest as if steadying herself. Marcus, how are we going to manage now? I'll figure something out. Marcus said quickly, though his stomach churned at the thought. I'll find another job. Don't stress about it, Mom. Don't stress, she repeated, her voice cracking. Marcus, you're the only one holding this family together. We've been scraping by as it is. You know I can't work anymore, and there's no insurance to cover my treatments. Mom, please, Marcus interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. I'll take care of it, I promise. You don't have to worry. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, her voice softening. You're too young to carry all this on your shoulders, Marcus. Marcus stepped closer, resting a hand on her frail shoulder. I've got this, okay? He said, his tone steady despite the turmoil inside him. You just focus on getting better. In the other room, Noah and Maya's laughter echoed as they played, their joy untouched by the heavy conversation in the kitchen. His mother looked toward the sound, a faint smile breaking through her worry. They don't understand, do they? How hard it is. No, Marcus said, shaking his head. And they don't need to. Let them be kids while they still can. That night, Marcus lay awake in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling above him. His father's words echoed in his mind again. You always stop to help, no matter the cost. He had done the right thing, but the weight of the consequences pressed heavily on him. As he drifted off to sleep, he silently vowed to find a way to make things right for his family and for himself. The sterile hum of machines filled the hospital room where Alexander Reed lay, his breath slow and shallow. His body ached all over, and his thoughts felt like fragments of a shattered mirror piecing themselves together. When he blinked his eyes open, the fluorescent lights above him were blinding. He winced, his head throbbing with pain. Alex? The familiar voice made him turn slightly, and there she was, his wife Evelyn, sitting by his bedside. Her usually impeccable appearance was slightly disheveled, her hair falling loose and her eyes red-rimmed from worry. You're awake, she said softly, relief washing over her face as she leaned forward to clasp his hand. What? What happened? He murmured, his voice hoarse. Evelyn adjusted the pillows behind him, her hands trembling slightly. You were in an accident, she explained gently. Your car went off the road and ended up in a ditch. You've been unconscious for a day. Alexander closed his eyes, trying to remember. He could vaguely recall the peaceful road, the sudden swerve, and then darkness. The rest was a blur. How did I get here? Evelyn hesitated, her expression softening. A young man brought you here, she said. The doctor said if he hadn't, you might not have made it. Alexander's brow furrowed as he struggled to grasp the memory. Slowly, pieces began to resurface. A voice calling out to him, firm hands helping him out of the wreckage, the faint smell of sweat and old car seats. I remember. Someone, he said, his voice still weak. A boy. He helped me. Evelyn nodded, her eyes filled with admiration. He didn't just help Alex. He saved your life. The next morning, Alexander was more alert, though still confined to his hospital bed. Evelyn was already on the phone, her voice firm and determined. We need to find him, she told the officer on the other end of the line. He's a young man, probably mid-teens. He brought my husband to the hospital in an old car and mentioned working at a grocery store. The officer agreed to help, though he warned that finding the boy might take time. We'll start by contacting local grocery stores, he said. If he's an employee, someone should recognize him. True to their word, the police began canvassing the area, visiting every grocery store within a 10-mile radius of the accident site. They spoke to managers and employees, repeating the same description. A teenage boy, likely wearing a store uniform, driving an older car. For the first few days, their efforts yielded no leads. Most managers shrugged, unable to recall anyone matching the description. Employees shook their heads, and the trail seemed to grow colder with each passing day. But Evelyn refused to give up. Each night, she sat by Alexander's bedside, updating him on the search. He's out there, she said with quiet resolve. We'll find him. Alexander, though still recovering, nodded each time. We owe him that much, he said, his voice firm despite his weakened state. A week later, Evelyn's phone rang early in the morning. She picked it up immediately, her heart racing. Mrs. Reed, the officer said on the other end, I think we've found someone who matches your description. Evelyn's grip tightened on the phone. Who is he? Where is he? A store manager at one of the grocery chains mentioned firing an employee last week, the officer explained. The boy was late to his shift and said he'd been helping someone in an accident. His name is Marcus, and we have his address. Evelyn felt a mix of relief and outrage. Fired? She repeated, incredulous. He saved someone's life, and they fired him? Unfortunately, yes, the officer replied. But the important thing is, we've located him. Evelyn hung up the phone and turned to Alexander, who was sitting upright in his hospital bed, looking stronger than he had days before. They found him, she said, her voice trembling slightly. His name is Marcus, and, Alex, he lost his job because he helped you. Alexander's jaw tightened, his expression darkening. Then we're going to make this right, he said, his voice steady. He deserves more than just our thanks. The next morning, Evelyn and Alexander left the hospital, accompanied by a police cruiser. Alexander still needed a cane to walk, but he insisted on going in person. If he gave up so much for me, the least I can do is look him in the eye and thank him, he said. They rode in a sleek black SUV, its polished exterior gleaming under the sunlight. As they approached the address provided by the officer, Evelyn's heart sank. The neighborhood was worn down, with cracked sidewalks and overgrown lawns. Many of the houses were in disrepair, their paint peeling and roofs sagging. But one house stood out even among the others. Marcus's home looked as though it had been forgotten by time. The shutters hung crookedly, the yard was cluttered with rusted tools and broken furniture, and the sagging roof seemed on the verge of collapse. Evelyn clasped a hand over her mouth. People live like this? She whispered, her voice heavy with disbelief. Alexander didn't respond immediately. He stared at the house, a pang of guilt washing over him. This boy, who had so little, had stopped to help a complete stranger without hesitation. We're going to fix this, Alexander said finally, his grip tightening on his cane. Inside the house, Marcus was seated near the door, lost in thought. The laughter of his younger siblings, Noah and Maya, echoed faintly from the other room, a stark contrast to the heaviness in his chest. The sudden screech of tires and the wail of police sirens snapped him out of his daze. He jumped to his feet, his heart pounding. What's going on? Noah asked, running to the window with wide eyes. Maya clutched her teddy bear, looking up at Marcus with worry. Did we do something wrong? Marcus shook his head, swallowing hard. Stay here, he said firmly, glancing at his mother, who was seated at the kitchen table. Her face had gone pale, her hands gripping the edge of the chair for support. I'll handle it, Marcus assured her, though his stomach churned with unease. Stepping outside, Marcus felt the weight of countless stories about police encounters in his community pressing down on him. He closed the door behind him and approached the officers cautiously. Are you Marcus? One of the officers asked, his tone neutral but commanding. Yes, Marcus replied, his hands at his sides. What's this about? Before the officer could respond, the back door of the SUV opened, and Alexander stepped out, leaning heavily on his cane. Evelyn followed, her warm smile contrasting with the tension in the air. Alexander nodded at Marcus, his expression a mix of gratitude and resolve. Thanks to you, I'm alive, he said. We've been looking for you all week. Marcus blinked, recognition dawning on him. You're the guy from the ditch, he said slowly. Alexander extended his hand. Alexander Reed, he introduced himself. And this is my wife, Evelyn. Hesitating briefly, Marcus shook his hand. I'm Marcus. Evelyn stepped forward, her expression full of warmth. We owe you so much, Marcus, she said. May we come in? We'd like to talk if that's okay. Marcus glanced back at the house, the chipped paint and sagging roof suddenly feeling like an indictment of their struggles. Yeah, he said finally. Come on in. The air inside the small house was thick with tension as Marcus led the Reeds into the living room. The worn furniture, faded rug, and peeling wallpaper painted a stark picture of the family's struggles. In the corner, A makeshift pile of toys and books hinted at the children's attempts to carve out moments of joy in a difficult life. Marcus's younger siblings, Noah and Maya, peeked out from behind their mother, Lena, who had risen from the kitchen table with visible effort. She leaned slightly on the back of a chair for support, her wary eyes darting between the Reeds and Marcus. "Mom," Marcus said softly, motioning toward the visitors. "This is Mr. Reed. He's the man I helped last week, and his wife, Mrs. Reed." Alexander stepped forward, his voice gentle and steady. "Ma'am, I owe your son my life. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be standing here today." Lena looked at Marcus, her lips trembling. "You're the man he talked about?" she asked, disbelief coloring her voice. "You're okay now?" "I'm healing," Alexander replied with a small nod. "Thanks to Marcus." His eyes swept across the room, taking in the cracks in the walls and the sagging ceiling. Evelyn's gaze followed his, and for a brief moment her warm smile faltered. "This is my mom," Marcus said quickly, sensing the unspoken pity in the air. "And these are my siblings, Noah and Maya." "Hello there," Evelyn said, crouching slightly to meet the children at eye level. Her tone was soft and welcoming, and she extended a hand toward Maya, who clutched her teddy bear tightly. Noah offered a shy wave, while Maya hesitated before murmuring a "hi." The family sat awkwardly as Evelyn perched on the edge of the couch, and Alexander eased himself into an armchair, his cane resting beside him. The silence stretched until Alexander broke it. "Marcus," he began, his tones serious but kind, "we wanted to know more about you and your family. What made you stop that day?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at his mother for reassurance. She gave him a small nod, and he took a deep breath. "I was on my way to work," Marcus said. "I saw your car in the ditch and you were hurt. I couldn't just leave you there. My dad always said you help people when they need it, no matter what." Alexander nodded slowly, his admiration evident. "That's rare these days," he said. "Most people would have driven right past." Marcus shrugged, trying to downplay his actions. It just felt like the right thing to do. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her expression warm but probing. "And your father?" she asked gently. "Is he here?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotion. Marcus's jaw tightened and he glanced at Lena, who lowered her gaze, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her cardigan. "He passed away when I was 10. Marcus said quietly. Evelyn's face softened. "I'm so sorry," she said. "That must have been incredibly hard for all of you." "It was," Marcus admitted, his voice steady but tinged with a quiet strength. "He worked hard and did everything he could for us, but when he was gone, someone had to step up." He paused, his gaze fixed on the floor. "That someone was me." Alexander's eyes lingered on Marcus, impressed by his composure and the weight of his words. "So you've been taking care of your family ever since?" Marcus nodded, sitting a little straighter. "Yeah, my mom worked for a while, cleaning jobs mostly, but then she got sick." "What kind of illness?" Evelyn asked, concern etched into her features. Lena shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable discussing it. "It's a heart condition," she admitted after a pause. "The treatments, they're expensive, and without insurance." She trailed off, the unspoken truth hanging in the air. "We've been managing," Marcus said quickly, his tone defensive, as if trying to shield his mother from pity. "I work as much as I can to cover the basics, groceries, bills, whatever we need." Evelyn's brow furrowed slightly. "But what about school?" she pressed gently. "Shouldn't you be focusing on that too?" Marcus hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I had to drop out last year," he admitted. "There just wasn't enough time between work and taking care of things at home. Something had to give." Alexander exchanged a glance with Evelyn, their expressions a mix of admiration and heartbreak. "You gave up school to support your family?" Alexander asked, his voice low. Marcus shrugged, trying to downplay the gravity of his sacrifice. "It's what anyone would do. Family comes first." "But not everyone does it," Alexander countered, leaning forward slightly. "Marcus, you've taken on responsibilities that most grown men would struggle with, and you've done it while putting everyone else before yourself." The room fell into a brief silence, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. Lena wiped at her eyes, her voice trembling as she said, "He's a good boy. Always has been. I wish he didn't have to carry so much." Evelyn reached out, placing a comforting hand on Lena's arm. "You've raised an incredible son," she said softly, but no one should have to do it all alone. Alexander straightened in his seat, his expression resolute. You're right, Evelyn. No one should. He turned to Marcus, his tone firm. That's why we're here. What do you mean? Marcus asked, his brow furrowing. I mean, we want to help, Alexander said, his voice steady. Starting with your mom's medical expenses, we'll cover her treatments, no matter the cost. Marcus's eyes widened, his voice faltering. You do that? Yes, Evelyn interjected, her tone warm but unwavering. Your mom shouldn't have to choose between her health and your family's survival. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but Alexander held up a hand to stop him. That's not all, he continued. We're also going to help you relocate. This house? He glanced around at the crumbling walls and sagging ceiling. It's not safe, and it's not what your family deserves. We'll find you a better place to live. Marcus stared at him, the words almost too overwhelming to process. Why would you do all that for us? Because you earned it, Alexander said simply. You didn't hesitate to save my life when you could have just driven past. You did what most people wouldn't. And this isn't charity. It's gratitude. You and your family deserve better. Evelyn nodded, her expression gentle but resolute. And there's one more thing, she added. You need to go back to school, Marcus. Your future is just as important as your family's present. We'll make sure you have what you need to focus on your education. Marcus clenched his fists, struggling to contain the whirlwind of emotions, gratitude, disbelief, and unease colliding within him. This is too much, he finally said, shaking his head. I don't deserve all this. Alexander leaned forward, his gaze steady. Yes, you do, he said firmly. You've been giving everything to everyone else for years. It's time someone gave back to you. But, Marcus began, but Evelyn interrupted gently. No buts, Marcus. You've already proven what kind of person you are. Let us help you. Marcus turned to his mother, who had tears streaming down her cheeks. She nodded, her voice breaking as she said, Let them help, baby. You've done so much. Let them lighten the load. The weight of her words sank into Marcus's chest. Slowly, he nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Okay. Alexander smiled, his expression softening. Good. We'll start making arrangements immediately. The room fell quiet again, the enormity of the moment settling over them. Lena reached out and clasped Evelyn's hand tightly, her voice trembling with gratitude. Thank you. Thank you so much. Evelyn squeezed her hand, her eyes glistening. It's the least we can do. The hum of moving trucks filled the crisp morning air as Marcus stood outside their new house, staring in disbelief. The house was nothing like the crumbling, sagging structure they had left behind. This one stood tall and sturdy, freshly painted in a warm cream color with shutters that gleamed in the sunlight. The lawn was neatly trimmed, the flower beds bursting with color. For a moment, Marcus felt as though he had stepped into someone else's life. He glanced over at his siblings, Noah and Maya, who were practically buzzing with excitement. Look at this yard, Noah shouted, darting across the grass. We can play soccer here. Maya followed, her teddy bear clutched tightly in one arm as she twirled in circles. It's so big, Marcus, she cried, her voice filled with wonder. Marcus smiled, though a lump was forming in his throat. He glanced at his mother, Lena, who stood beside him, leaning slightly on her cane for support. Her cheeks were wet with silent tears, her hand gripping his arm tightly. It's beautiful, Lena whispered, her voice trembling. I never thought we'd live in a place like this. Alexander and Evelyn Reed approached from the moving truck, Alexander's cane tapping lightly against the pavement. What do you think? Alexander asked, his tone casual but his expression hopeful. It's more than we ever imagined, Lena said, her voice breaking. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Thank you both. Evelyn stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Lena's shoulder. You deserve this, she said warmly. All of you. The moving crew worked quickly, unloading furniture into the house. Alexander and Evelyn insisted on staying to help, directing the movers and offering kind words to Lena and the kids. By midday, the house began to feel like a home. The sound of laughter echoed through the halls as Noah and Maya explored every corner, marveling at their new rooms. Marcus wandered into his own room, a space that was all his for the first time in his life. The walls were painted a calming shade of blue and a sturdy desk sat by the window, bathed in natural light. On the desk was a brand new backpack filled with notebooks and supplies. As Marcus ran his hand over the desk, Evelyn appeared in the doorway, smiling. "How does it feel?" she asked. Marcus turned to her, his voice quiet. "It feels like a dream." Evelyn stepped inside, her gaze soft. "You've worked so hard, Marcus. You deserve this. And school, that's your new focus now." She motioned to the backpack. "We've taken care of your tuition and supplies. All you need to do is show up and do your best." Marcus hesitated, the weight of their generosity pressing down on him. "I'll make it count," he said firmly. "I promise." The following Monday, Marcus stood outside the gates of Greenfield High, gripping the straps of his new backpack. The morning sun bathed the campus in a golden glow. But Marcus felt a knot of nerves twisting in his stomach. It had been a year since he'd left school. Walking back through the gates felt surreal, like stepping into a world he no longer belonged to. "All right," he muttered to himself, taking a deep breath. "Let's do this." Inside, the familiar rhythm of the school day began to fall into place. Marcus attended his classes, jotting down notes with precision and asking questions whenever something didn't make sense. He quickly realized how much he had missed the structure and purpose that the school provided. His teachers, surprised by his sudden return, couldn't help but notice the new intensity in his demeanor. Marcus, his math teacher, Mr. Patel, said one afternoon, "You've been quiet for most of the year. What changed?" Marcus hesitated before replying, "I just realized I've got a lot to make up for." Back at home, the changes in their lives became more evident with each passing day. Lena, now receiving proper medical treatment, began to regain her strength. She started taking short walks around the neighborhood, her cheeks gaining color and her spirits lifting. Noah and Maya thrived in their new environment. Noah often dragged Marcus outside to kick a soccer ball in the spacious yard, while Maya delighted in riding her bike safely down the quiet streets. Their laughter filled the house, a sound that had once been rare in their lives. Marcus found himself smiling more often, the weight on his shoulders feeling lighter than it had in years. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner around their new dining table, Lena clasped her hands together. "Let's take a moment," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "to thank God for these blessings and to thank the Reeds for everything they've done." The family bowed their heads, but Marcus couldn't stop his mind from racing. He wasn't just thankful. He was determined. This second chance wasn't something he would waste. After dinner, Marcus sat at his desk, flipping through a study guide Evelyn had given him. The words felt heavier than they should, loaded with the weight of responsibility and opportunity. He looked out the window at the darkened street, the faint hum of crickets filling the night air. "I've got to make this work," he whispered to himself. A few weeks later, Alexander stopped by the house with a bag of books. He found Marcus seated at the dining table, poring over his homework. "I thought these might help," Alexander said, placing the books on the table. "They're study guides for your classes. If you need help, just let me know." Marcus flipped through the books, his chest tightening with gratitude. "Thanks, Mr. Reed, I'll use them." Alexander smiled, his voice steady. "I know you will, Marcus. You've got what it takes to do great things." Those words stayed with Marcus, echoing in his mind during every late-night study session and every challenging day at school. He began to see his life not as a series of obstacles, but as opportunities waiting to be seized. Months passed, and Marcus's life transformed in ways he had once only dreamed of. At school, he became a standout student, driven by a newfound determination to succeed. His teachers noticed his focus, his willingness to ask questions, and the extra hours he spent studying. In math class, he volunteered to solve equations that left others scratching their heads. In English, his essays reflected a depth of thought that surprised even himself. Every accomplishment, no matter how small, was a reminder of how far he had come and how far he still wanted to go. At home, Marcus's family thrived in their new environment. Lena's health improved steadily under the care of top specialists arranged by the Reeds. She no longer had to choose between her medicine and the groceries, a choice she had hidden from her children for years. For the first time in a long time, Marcus caught glimpses of the vibrant, strong woman his mother used to be. "Marcus," Lena said one evening as they sat together on the porch. Her voice was softer now, no longer strained. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." Marcus turned to her, startled. "Me? Mom, it's because of Mr. and Mrs. Reed. Without them," she shook her head, interrupting him gently. "No, baby. They helped us because of you. You made all this happen." The changes in Marcus's academic performance didn't go unnoticed. One afternoon, as he packed up his books after class, his guidance counselor, Mr. Lopez, called him into his office. "Marcus," Mr. Lopez began, smiling warmly, "your progress has been remarkable. You've gone from being out of school to earning some of the best grades in your class." Marcus sat down, feeling a mix of pride and humility. "Thank you, Mr. Lopez. I've had a lot of help." Lopez nodded. "That's true, but it's your effort that made the difference. Which is why I wanted to talk to you about college." Marcus blinked. "College?" "Yes," Lopez said, sliding a glossy brochure across the desk. "This is Washington University. It's a prestigious school, but with your grades and your story, I think you've got what it takes to get in." Marcus picked up the brochure, his hands trembling slightly as he flipped through it. The campus photos seemed almost unreal. Modern buildings, expansive libraries, students with bright futures ahead of them. "I don't know," Marcus said quietly. "College feels out of reach." "Not for you," Lopez said firmly. "You've proven that you can overcome anything. And if money is a concern, there are scholarships that can help. I'd be happy to guide you through the process." Marcus swallowed hard, his mind racing. "Thank you, Mr. Lopez. I'll think about it." That evening, Marcus shared the news with Alexander and Evelyn during one of their regular visits. Alexander's face lit up with pride. "Washington University? That's incredible, Marcus," he said. "You have to apply." "But what if I don't get in?" Marcus asked hesitantly. "You will," Evelyn said confidently, "and we'll support you every step of the way. Tuition, housing, books, don't let those worries hold you back." Marcus stared at them, overwhelmed by their unwavering belief in him. "I don't even know what to say," he admitted. "Say you'll go for it," Alexander said, smiling. "And when you get that acceptance letter, we'll celebrate together." Weeks turned into months as Marcus balanced his schoolwork and the college application process. On a chilly spring morning, the letter arrived. Marcus stood in the kitchen, his hands trembling as he held the envelope with Washington University's logo printed on it. Lena and Maya gathered around him, their faces filled with anticipation. "Open it," Maya urged, bouncing on her toes. Marcus took a deep breath and carefully tore the envelope open. His eyes scanned the page, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. "Dear Marcus," he began, his voice shaking, "we are pleased to offer you admission to Washington University." The room erupted into cheers. Noah jumped up and down, shouting, "He did it! Marcus got in!" Maya threw her arms around his waist, squeezing him tightly. Lena wiped tears from her eyes, her voice thick with emotion. "Your dad would be so proud," she said softly. "We all are." Marcus hugged her, his heart swelling with gratitude and determination. This wasn't just his achievement, it was theirs. College life was a whirlwind. Marcus immersed himself in his studies, majoring in business administration with a focus on entrepreneurship. The workload was demanding, but Marcus approached each challenge with the same grit that had carried him through high school. Alexander remained a steady presence, checking in regularly to offer advice and encouragement. "Remember, Marcus," Alexander said during one of their phone calls, "college is more than just academics. Build connections, network, and take every opportunity to learn outside the classroom." Marcus took the advice to heart, joining student organizations, attending networking events, and interning during the summers. Over time, he developed relationships with mentors and peers who would shape his journey in unexpected ways. By his final year, Marcus was not only excelling academically, but had also gained a reputation as a leader among his classmates. The day of Marcus's graduation was a celebration unlike any other. The stadium was packed with families, friends, and proud graduates dressed in their caps and gowns. Marcus stood in line, his heart pounding as he waited to hear his name called. When it finally came, the crowd erupted into applause. Marcus Carter, Bachelor of Business Administration, magna cum laude. As Marcus walked across the stage, he spotted his family in the audience. Lena, now healthier and more vibrant than he'd seen her in years, was wiping tears of joy. Noah and Maya were cheering loudly, their voices carrying over the noise of the crowd. And there, sitting beside them, were Alexander and Evelyn, clapping and beaming with pride as if Marcus were one of their own. After the ceremony, Alexander approached him, shaking his hand firmly. "Congratulations, Marcus. This is only the beginning." Marcus smiled, his voice thick with emotion. "Thanks to you, Mr. Reed. I wouldn't be here without you." Alexander shook his head. "You worked for this, Marcus. All I did was help you see your potential." Shortly after graduation, Alexander offered Marcus a position at Reed Enterprises, his successful business. "It's an entry-level role," Alexander explained. "But if you bring the same effort you showed in school, I have no doubt you'll rise quickly." Marcus accepted eagerly, ready to prove himself once again. The transition from student to professional was daunting, but Marcus embraced the challenge. He stayed late, asked questions, and learned from everyone around him. Within a few years, Marcus's innovative ideas and strong leadership skills caught the attention of senior executives. He earned multiple promotions, each one bringing him closer to his ultimate goal. Standing by the large glass window in his corner office one evening, Marcus gazed out at the city skyline. The golden hues of the setting sun illuminated the room, casting long shadows across his desk. He thought back to where it all began: the broken-down car, the wreckage, and the decision to stop and help. His life had come full circle, and he knew deep down that this was just the start of something even greater. Years passed, and Marcus's life continued to evolve. As he rose through the ranks at Reed Enterprises, he never forgot the sacrifices that brought him to this point. His success wasn't just a personal victory. It was a testament to the love and support of his family, the generosity of the Reeds, and the lessons instilled by his late father. Marcus had become not just a respected professional, but a man determined to give back. Using his position, he started funding scholarships for underprivileged students, ensuring that others like him had a chance to chase their dreams. "This isn't just about money," Marcus said during one of his first scholarship presentations. "It's about belief. Someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and that made all the difference." Marcus's siblings, Noah and Maya, had flourished in their new lives. Noah, inspired by Marcus's perseverance, pursued a degree in engineering. Maya, ever curious and creative, had dreams of becoming a writer and was already working on her first novel. Their family gatherings were filled with laughter, stories, and the comforting warmth of togetherness, a stark contrast to the struggles they had endured in their old home. One Sunday afternoon, as they all sat around the dining table, Lena placed her hands on top of Marcus's. "You've done more for this family than I could ever ask," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. Marcus shook his head. "We did this together, Mom. You never gave up on us, even when things were hard. That's what kept me going." At Reed Enterprises, Marcus wasn't just known for his business acumen. He had also become a mentor to younger employees, sharing his story and encouraging them to find their own paths. One afternoon, a young intern named Claire nervously approached Marcus in his office. "Mr. Carter, do you have a moment?" "Always," Marcus replied, gesturing for her to sit. "I just wanted to thank you," Claire began, her voice shaking slightly. "Hearing your story, it's made me realize that even when things seem impossible, there's always a way forward." Marcus smiled, leaning forward in his chair. "There's always a way," he agreed. "But it starts with believing in yourself and never being afraid to ask for help when you need it." Claire nodded, her confidence growing. "Thank you, I'll remember that." One evening, as Marcus wrapped up a long day at work, there was a knock on his office door. He looked up to see Alexander standing there, leaning slightly on his cane, but with the same commanding presence as always. "Mr. Reed," Marcus said, standing to greet him. "This is a surprise." Alexander chuckled. "I could say the same to you, Mr. Carter. You've been hard to catch these days." Marcus motioned for him to sit, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Busy doesn't even begin to cover it. But it's always good to see you." As they sat together, a comfortable silence settled between them. Finally, Marcus spoke, his tone more serious. "I've been meaning to thank you, Mr. Reed, for everything." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Thank me? For what?" "For saving my family," Marcus said, his voice steady. "For giving me a chance when no one else would." Alexander leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "Marcus, all I did was open a door. You're the one who walked through it and kept walking, no matter how hard the path got. Marcus smiled faintly. Still, I wouldn't be here without you. Well, Alexander said, standing and leaning on his cane, when the time comes, remember to pay it forward. Someone else out there is waiting for a chance, just like you were. I won't forget, Marcus promised. Over the years, Marcus's impact extended far beyond his career. He founded community programs that provided mentorship, financial literacy training, and job placement assistance for underserved youth. One summer evening, Marcus stood on stage at a gala organized to honor his philanthropic work. The room was filled with familiar faces, family, friends, colleagues, and even Alexander and Evelyn seated proudly near the front. As Marcus stepped up to the podium, he took a moment to collect his thoughts. I stand here today because someone believed in me when I couldn't see my own potential, he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. Kindness isn't just about grand gestures, it's about the small moments when we choose to help someone, even when it costs us something. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the audience. I'll never forget the day I chose to stop and help a stranger. That moment didn't just change his life, it changed mine. The room erupted into applause as Marcus stepped back, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. One weekend, Marcus drove through the peaceful streets of his mother's neighborhood, the car humming softly beneath him. The modest house he had purchased for her stood bright and inviting, surrounded by a neatly trimmed lawn and colorful flowers that Maya had planted. As he pulled into the driveway, the familiar smell of his mother's cooking wafted through the air. Inside, the family was gathered around the dining table, their laughter filling the room. Lena, now healthier and more vibrant than Marcus had ever hoped, set a steaming dish of her famous jambalaya on the table. You've been working too hard again, she chided, half serious. Sit down and eat. I missed this, Marcus admitted as he hugged her tightly. Noah and Maya teased him relentlessly about his busy schedule, but their pride in their older brother was unmistakable. After dinner, Marcus stepped outside, leaning against the porch railing as the stars twinkled above. His mother joined him, her smile soft and knowing. You've come so far, Marcus, she said quietly. Your dad would be proud. Marcus looked down, his mother's words sinking deep into his chest. I think about him a lot, he admitted, especially what he used to say about helping others. And look at everything you've done because of that, Lena said. You've honored him in the best way. Years later, Marcus sat at his desk in the bustling office he now called his own. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Come in, he called, and a young man stepped inside nervously. I heard you're hiring, the young man said, holding a crumpled resume. I know I don't have much experience, but I'm willing to work hard. Marcus studied him for a moment, recognizing the same determination that had once driven him. He smiled and stood, extending his hand. Let's talk, Marcus said warmly. Everyone deserves a chance. At that moment, Marcus realized that his journey had truly come full circle. Marcus's journey is a powerful testament to the transformative power of kindness and perseverance. What started as a single selfless act, a decision to help a stranger in need, unfolded into a life-changing series of events, not only for Marcus, but for everyone around him. This story reminds us that even the smallest choices can ripple outward, creating impacts far beyond what we could ever imagine. Through Marcus's resilience, we see the value of staying true to one's principles, even in the face of adversity. His determination to overcome obstacles, paired with the generosity and support of the Reeds, demonstrates that kindness is a two-way street. Sometimes, giving help inspires others to give it back, creating a cycle of hope and possibility. For those watching, this isn't just a story about triumph over hardship. It's a call to action. It's a reminder to stop when we see someone in need, to lift others when we have the chance, and to believe in the potential of people even when they can't yet see it themselves. We all have the power to be someone's turning point, just as Marcus was for Alexander, and as Alexander was for Marcus. What would the world look like if we all embraced that power? If you found this story inspiring, we'd love to hear from you. Comment 1 if you thought it was good, and comment 2 if you thought it was amazing. Share your thoughts about Marcus's journey, or tell us about a time when kindness changed your life. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more meaningful stories like this one. And if you think someone else could use a little inspiration today, share this video with them. Let us know what you think in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. Thank you for watching, and remember, a single act of kindness can change the world, one life at a time.